do you have to believe in reincarnation to be a Buddhist? So it's probably one of the most different ideas for Westerners who were from a Judeo-Christian background to digest about Buddhism. And I think a really good place to start is that reincarnation, the idea itself, isn't just about what happens after we die per se. And I think that that's something that's often overlooked. It's true, many people who are Buddhists are not sure. They're not sure what happens after we die. Other people have a conviction that reincarnation is true. Buddhism's so diverse. And again, as I always say, there's not one right way to be Buddhist. Every tradition and lineage has its unique, distinct flavors and emphasis, but reincarnation is an idea that permeates all of Buddhism. And so I think before we even get into those questions individually, it's really helpful as people who draw from Buddhist wisdom, or if you're a Buddhist practitioner yourself, a good starting place is to understand that the teachings of reincarnation in Buddhism are not existing in a vacuum, but also actually come with a whole body of teachings that reflect a view of reality. One, of course, is the idea of karma, that one thing leads to another. So this notion of reincarnation is an idea of cause and effect, that our actions now have results. But not just cause and effect, but the idea of a kind of momentum, that we can develop habitual mind states. Like if I'm angry today, it's not just about being angry now, but the states of further anger that leads to. And then the actions based on that anger that leads to, and the identity based on having been angry that it leads to. And so part of the idea of reincarnation is this kind of way where our life manifests in this cycle where one thing leads to another, leads to another, leads to another, and that can be known as samsara. It's a Sanskrit word which is this cycle of confusion and dissatisfaction, or even all-out suffering. Also, too, reincarnation is tied in with the idea of our interdependence with other beings, because we, as Buddhists, not only believe that we reincarnate, but that when we reincarnate, that life after life, over time, all sentient beings at one time or another have been our mothers and fathers. So that's a really radical thought, that at one time or another, every being acted as our mother, that they nourished us and took care of us and gave us life and sacrificed for us, and that we have that debt to them and we're dependent upon them, helpless. I mean, it's such an amazing view of life that we begin to see that the world that we're really surrounded with is not a bunch of strangers, but that through time, through endless time, that we've been connected together with beings and dependent on one another. And I think another kind of repercussion of the idea of reincarnation is this notion of successive births and deaths, is that our state of being is not dependent on our circumstances. The idea of reincarnation is that how we are right now isn't just manifesting because of what happened today or didn't happen today, or how someone is treating us, or what they are saying to us or not saying to us, or what needs they're not meeting that we have. Instead, the idea is that our state of being is actually, it's a phenomenon that's had its own momentum, and that it's not just only influenced by our present circumstances or our parents in this life, but that it's this kind of continuum of mental habits and ideas that we've been accumulating over time. And it really places the responsibility on the individual, because we understand that we're not just coming into circumstances as a blank slate. That would be the ideal. That's why we do Buddhist practice. We want to come fresh and experience things from a new state of mind, and as if for the first time. But instead, we're often carrying around a lot of baggage. If you don't believe lifetimes of baggage, maybe just years of baggage, and a lot of concepts and conditioned scripts, most of which are uninspected and unquestioned. And they lead to these habitual ways of being that, though they are influenced by circumstances, it's not just about what's happening right now, but more the habitual ways of being themselves. And so you can see how this idea of reincarnation has a lot of things tied to it. Also, too, it's about death and what happens for death, and at death, really. How do we prepare for death? I mean, that's the most obvious thing, because if we believe in reincarnation, that comes along with this worldview where we see that mind is going through these states and it continues to go through those states, that we continue those mental habits until they are liberated. And so then our idea of preparing for death changes. We understand that we have to use our life in such a way that after our death, we're not just repeating the same patterns in the next life. If you can imagine, like, your worst relationship, it's bad enough if you have that same kind of relationship 2 or 3 or 4 times with different people. That's frustrating. But lifetimes or hundreds of lifetimes of repeating that same dysfunctional pattern, it becomes a motivation that we have this idea that reincarnation, that we again and again repeat these patterns, and that if we don't liberate them, if we don't awaken from these habitual sleepy states, then we repeat another lifetime of those same themes and those same ways of being. And so along with it, reincarnation becomes this kind of motivational force that we don't want to repeat patterns of limitation. We don't want to be the cause of suffering to others. We don't want to be stuck in our own cycles of dissatisfaction, not for the long term, not for now, not after our life. And so there's this sense, along with the idea of reincarnation, that if we don't awaken from these cyclic patterns of confusion, that they'll just keep happening. And that the unacceptability of that, a kind of feeling of motivation to break free from that cycle, is the outcropping of the teaching of reincarnation. And sometimes when people are thinking of this idea, it's not necessarily based on whether you believe in reincarnation or not. Do you have enough understanding of the Buddhist idea or not, to even make that decision? But I think people get caught up in these questions of faith. Is it okay to not believe it or believe in it? And so Buddhists often quote the saying from the Buddha, that you have to be able to experience the teachings for yourself, or analyze for yourself, and really for yourself come to know what the teachings mean. And really, if we see the idea of reincarnation in the most essential way, it's something we can observe now in our own mind. It's not about a far-fetched theory of afterlife only, but really looking at how mind is now, how we can see that in our dreams at night we have mental habits. Maybe it's fear or anxiety. And then in the day, again, we have those mental habits. Same fear, same anxiety. And then we go into our relationship and that fear and anxiety. And we can actually see in our mind now, on just a day-to-day basis, even moment-to-moment basis, how we reincarnate into the same identities, same mental states. And that's something that's happening now. And on that level, I think that that's a really accessible point to begin to explore those questions of how mind is working now, how now relates to just even the immediate past, and how we can wake up so that that's not just this repetition of unconscious cycles, but that instead something new, that there's a sense of possibility and potential that's also available to us from moment to moment.